Hi, and welcome to Unplanned. I'm Sam, your host, and today on Unplanned, we're going to talk about a topic that's very important in cities, but often doesn't get the attention it needs, and that's talking about veterans. Veterans Day is coming up. We're in early November right now. Actually, it turns out it's quite a warm day here in Massachusetts. And I have the pleasure of talking with Neil MacInnes-Barker, who is the Director of Veteran Services here in the city of Cambridge. He also is himself an Air Force veteran. We're going to learn all about that, and we're going to spend a lot of time just understanding what it means on the city side and also for veterans, what's going on. So Neil, thanks for joining us on Unplanned.
My pleasure. I really appreciate you taking the time. It's nice to have this. It's nice and scary to have this nice weather today, but
that's right. We'll also get into that just briefly. Before we get any further, let me just point out that we're sitting, Neil and I are sitting under the Washington Elm. This is the location where George Washington, on July 3rd, 1775, took command of the American Army, basically creating the U.S. Army, if I've got that right. And what you can't see off camera is that there are 3 cannons over here that originally belonged to the British, but I think they left them somewhere in New York State, and they got dragged over here about 240 years ago. So that's what it's like being in Massachusetts talking about veterans issues. Anyway, Neil, enough out of me. Let's learn a little bit about you. What's your background? What's your day job? But also talk about your veteran experience and other stuff you've been doing.
So I really appreciate you having me here, Sam. This is really a treat, especially coming up before Veterans Day. So as you said, I was a United States Air Force veteran. I was a medic for 5 years, and when I got out, I did a variety of things. I was a volunteer firefighter. I did home health care because I kind of brought the medical experience with me over there. And then more recently, I started a nonprofit called Voice Us, which is kind of fallow right now as I took this role in 2015. And that focused on legislative advocacy for civic engagement of citizens, kind of with like the election going on now, for people to be involved, understand the value of voting and being connected with their elected officials. So since then I started in October of 2015, so I'm at my 5-year anniversary, just over. And when I started, one of the first things that I faced was the amount of homelessness, veteran homelessness that we had in Cambridge.
Well, we'll get to all of that.
Yes.
First, just give us a little more background on your Air Force time. Where were you stationed? What were you? You were sent overseas, I'm guessing, but I don't know.
I, as most folks in the Air Force and then in the medical corps, we typically spend a lot of time in Texas for training. And then once I completed all my clinical and my medical work, I was very lucky to get special orders to Andrews Air Force Base, or Andrews Joint Bases Andrews, which is called now, which is the base where the president flies in and out, and
where's that in?
That's in Washington D.C.
In Washington D.C., yeah.
Southeast D.C.
Is it actually in D.C. or is it in Virginia?
It's in D.C. It's in like Clinton, Maryland, I guess. So southeast part, but very easy to get into D.C. And I loved being there. It was really a fascinating experience to be in the Capitol, to have all the free museums and the work there with much higher ranking folks. That was a little intimidating at first, but also very gratifying. From there, I was overseas. I was stationed at Royal Air Force Base Lakenheath, which was just outside of Cambridge, England. And from there, I came back to the States again. And I worked in just about every part of the hospital except obstetrics, or excuse me, orthopedics. I actually worked in obstetrics, labor and delivery, postpartum, antepartum, all of the work with birth and families. Worked in pediatrics, newborn ICU, did some rescue, a lot of different things. That's one of the things in the military is you do typically a lot more than what your job description is.
Well, that's whenever I've interacted with military people, that's kind of their attitude is, we have a problem and you need to solve it, and it doesn't matter whether you have training or background, it becomes your problem at that moment. Yeah.
You improvise. That's the Air Force's one. Yeah, we like to say.
Well, so that sounds fascinating, and I assume it was an honor to serve, and you able to wear the uniform. And
it absolutely was, though there are parts of it that weren't an honor that is more of a bigger story, and that was being in the early 90s as a gay man. I had to be closeted,
right.
And I actually was in during the time that Clinton was trying to do the Don't Ask, Don't Tell. He was trying to do an appeal, right?
Right.
Repeal, but it became Newt Gingrich's Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which seemed okayish, but ended up being terrible. So during that time, there was a hyper focus on LGBTQ folks in the military, which made it even more stressful. Right. The amount of discharges after that. So I basically went through a witch hunt investigation. I was followed, my incoming and outgoing mail was opened. There was a lot of significant harassment, and I was well decorated and really appreciated and hitting all the awards and things like that. But it was because there was a suspicion that I might be gay or bisexual that I was kind of...
Really? Wow.
So while it was an honor, and I loved doing what I did, and I did it very well according to all of my supervisors and leaders, there was a stain on it that made it hard. To be honest, I would have retired. I would have stayed in for probably over 20 years. I'm sure I would have been a lifer.
Oh, you would have stayed in.
I would have been getting out now, probably.
Right.
You know,
fascinating.
somewhere around now.
Yeah.
Because I loved the Air Force. I have a tremendous amount of respect for the leadership and for and love for the country. And it's just this conflict that it was too much.
Yeah.
It was too much, so I decided to...
it sort of begs the question, and we're not going to spend the whole time on it. It's a whole other topic, but a fascinating one of, what were they so afraid of? But that's just to close out that topic, do you feel it's in current day military they've gotten to a better place on that issue, or?
I would say as far as legal rights, in order to have an ability to contest if you're being harassed or passed over for rank and such. But if you think about it, the United States military, for all the departments in the defense for the country, are really a small microcosm of the country. And a lot of it, especially for enlisted folk, are from central and southern parts of America, where you're getting a lot of people that are making up the leadership within it who might have very strong biases, and then also people who are still in that might be retiring around now that were in during Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and have very strong conservative views. So while it is better, there's a lot of ways to kind of circumvent what the laws are and such, and rank has its privileges. The lower ranking you are, the harder it is to have protections and stuff. So while I'm excited finish your thought.
Well,
I'm excited to see folks go in the military who are LGB, because folks who are transgender can't. I also still worry about, it depends where they were stationed. Like I might have gone through my witch hunt investigation if, for example, I had a very liberal colonel from Maine who also might have also been, LGB or something. Right. But I unfortunately had very Christian conservative hospital commander, base commander, and folks around me where I was. Right. So, but it's definitely better. But it's just like everything else. The arc of progress, right? It's
slow. Yeah. I was just going to interject that it reminds me of a boss I had who was an Army brat. He wasn't Army himself, but his father grew up on Army bases, and he used to always say to me that there's a phrase that stuff rolls downhill, and it always does. It always does. Well, that is of course fascinating. Maybe at some other opportunity we'll have the chance to talk about
Pride Month.
Yeah, exactly. But let's talk about Cambridge specifically, and veterans and the kind of issues that you're seeing and facing and working on and dealing with here in Cambridge. Tell us a little bit about that in the city of Cambridge, but also maybe more generally, the state of Veterans Affairs as it stands right now. What are some of the issues you're tackling?
So coming into the city of Cambridge, one of the things for our department is that we weren't terribly visible or known.
Right.
So one of the things that we did in starting out was to do a lot of outreach, to really, it seemed to some folks, they weren't used to it. You know, why is the Department of Veteran Services at Riverfest? Why are we at these different public events? It's because folks didn't even know we existed. And maybe we wouldn't reach veterans all the time, but we would meet someone who would know one, and then they could refer them to us. Social media, developing social media for the entire department for the same purpose, to be able to make connections. And then networking events with other veteran organizations around the state. So that was the first order of business, which was to get folks to know more knowledge about who we are and what we can do, which is to assist with VA federal disability claims, non-service or service-connected ones. We also help with a subsistence allowance benefit, which is called Chapter 115. And that is a program with a lot of benefits for folks who are struggling financially. We make sure we help feed people, get them the medicines they need, that they're housed. And this actually, a lot of people don't know, this is something that's unique in Massachusetts and was started right after the Civil War. So this is a long history. This is a Department of Veteran Services being passed under Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 115, that every community, by census data, has a Veteran Service Officer, a VSO, which is what I am and Cynthia in my office is. And it's based on population, so we have a staff, we're 4 of us in my office. Some parts of the states we have districts where they don't have as much of a population, and there's one Veteran Service Officer that takes care of a few. But that's something that is...
But is this specifically about the feeding and the help in that? And that dates back to the Civil War?
Right after the Civil War, for folks who came back who had trouble, you know, they had an injury. They had much worse injuries then. Not much worse, but a lot more of really dramatic injuries and traumatic injuries that people had that couldn't get services. So it was something that Massachusetts recognized. So for example, in other parts of the country, and I don't know for all states in the United States, but for many states around the country, there is one person in my role that's in a major city, maybe in 3 or 4 major cities depending on the state. But in Massachusetts, there's a person, a Veteran Service Officer, in every city, town, and community based on census. So we have about 350.
Well, I'm just going to make the note that that's yet another way in which Massachusetts is progressive and forward-thinking, and even was 150 years ago, or whenever 1867 was. That's amazing. I don't think of Cambridge as a hotbed of veterans, but maybe I'm wrong. I mean, obviously Cambridge plays a very historic role in American military history, hence the Washington Elm behind us, the cannons. The Civil War monument is right over there. I think some of the first units were raised right here in Cambridge. But what's the status now? Is Cambridge have a lot of veterans?
So that's been a thorn in my side for the last 5 years, meaning trying to answer that question.
Yeah.
So census data, when I started working in Cambridge, I was trying to find out what the census data was for veterans. It's very, very, very little. They don't count veteran status anymore. They stopped that, I think, in 2010 or 8.
The census stopped counting veteran status?
Veterans in the city of Cambridge.
Oh, interesting.
Cambridge,
interesting.
Census.
Interesting.
And so, but even prior to that, the amount of information that you had was really like 1%.
Right.
So what I was really hoping to get was significant data so that I could kind of curtail my agenda to female veterans over 60. Recently returning veterans in their 20s, you know, World War II, Korea veterans, because the approach and the services that everyone needs are quite different.
Right.
So without having that answer for my agenda, it was difficult. I just kind of made a lot of assumptions.
Also, can I just jump in on that for a second? It just occurs to me that, and correct this if this is not right, that if you're a Marine coming back from combat, that's one issue. If you were on a Navy ship for 4 years, that's a different, probably a different set of issues. You both need veteran services. You both might want to access veteran services, but it might be very different worlds that you as a veteran service officer or an Air Force person who is in Japan for 5 years, you know, they're very different kind of challenges that you have to face.
There's 2 points that are really important with that, and one is that a veteran, no matter who and where you are, you immediately have a camaraderie because we all go through this serious training, very challenging times. Most of us have similar experiences in a lot of the common circumstances, and then there's variances in what kind of work we did. But that veteran identity, so for me to go interact with somebody to gain their trust, I get there tenfold faster than a civilian would, than someone that hadn't served, because it's a cultural part. The second part of that is within that culture, there's also segments, right? So if you think of World War II, we were a country going against a bad guys, right? A lot of people were lining up to go join. Korea, we were kind of exhausted, but still folks were going in and they believed in it enough, right? Fighting communism. So folks, the VFWs, people who are over their 80s, Korea and World War II folks, they have a lot of pride. They don't mind asking for benefits, though they still have that veteran kind of selflessness, which is like, oh, I'll take care of someone else that might need help more. But they're okay with accepting help, and they also will spend a lot of time with each other talking about their experiences, which is therapeutic.
Yeah, of course.
Vietnam, we know, is the first time that we learned to value the veteran and oppose a war, because we were opposing veterans when they came back and treated them very terribly. That was the first significant one. Now there's dissenters in every war, right, all the way back in history, but Vietnam was the most, with the most vitriol. So that's the first time that it made a huge barrier to assist a Vietnam veteran. Their issues were much more complex: mental health, substance abuse, all kinds of challenges. For some,
well, can I just make a question on that?
Yep.
Is it just that we became more sophisticated in understanding what happens to a person when they go off to war? Presumably, a World War II vet came back with mental health issues, substance abuse issues, etc.
100%, yes, indeed. But the difference is when you come back with what they call shell shock or PTSD or a lost limb or blindness or TBI, which they didn't even know about back then, you had parades.
What is TBI?
Traumatic brain injury.
Okay, sure. Yep.
And also we call it's variants, but we say PTS or PTSD. There is a dropping of the D for the disorder to just say post-traumatic stress.
Yeah.
But it's synonymous. It's like the other acronyms. But folks coming back with injuries, mental or physical or moral, when you have ticker tape parades and folks hugging you and just you're on the front of every page of everything, that's very different. So yes, some people understood, that there were civilians in other countries who were also suffering, that we were dropping bombs on and such. But there was much more admiration and appreciation and feeling that our security and safety was preserved. Vietnam was one of the most significant turning points in that it was where folks, as you're saying, became a little more sophisticated and an awareness, but also the war itself was different in that we went somewhere that seemed that a lot of people were opposed to. And then as it progressed, it was more and more, it felt like it was more of deceit with government. And then with Nixon, the greater distrust of government. So from there, that really changed the dynamic, and then we kind of got through the 70s and the 80s and kind of shifted to this appreciation of veterans and having a better understanding of war and conflict. The next change for the next group of people are for the Gulf War era folks.
Which is from what? Well, there was early 90s, and then there was 2003. Three when we initially, and we've 2005, and now we're still. We've been in constant conflict, basically.
Exactly.
Okay,
and these are differences also. So, I mean, this is a huge segment on its own because, but just for those folks, you sign up to join, and a lot of those folks through the 90s, especially. In early 2000s, we're experiencing a lot of contractors coming in. So you go in to be a medic, right? And you are trained and you're ready in the service. And now there's someone who comes in. It wasn't very often medics, but for example, that's my example, that you have now a contractor who is taking some of your duties and someone else's duties, and they're getting paid really well. And they've got danger pay that you do as well. Maybe it's a little higher. But they have no responsibility to enlistment or anything like that, and you're not fully doing what you were doing. And there's this conflict and confusion of who's in charge and such and such.
Who do they answer to?
Exactly. So this is another change, and the other part of that with where it's like, is it a war for oil? Is it? So everything since then, we're more sophisticated, we have more knowledge, And also there's not been like a massive force against us that hasn't been contained. Cold War era and then post-Cold War, there are conflicts, and that we have partnerships around the world, hopefully, most often, and that, you know, we're supposed to be doing the right thing. So
I want to ask you a question directed at you. I mean, you've talked very eloquently and with great insight and depth.
thank you.
But where did you learn that stuff? I mean, is that just you thinking about this and trying to process where we are today? Is that?
Yeah, asking a lot of questions.
Okay.
Mostly through this job.
Okay.
Trying to, trying to bring services to veterans to find out what I thought they might need to help them with resistance to getting medical care, resistance to housing, or challenges with housing.
Is that true for the Gulf War era veterans as well? I mean, do they come back and they're like, no, I don't want to talk to anybody, I don't want to deal with anybody?
Most folks that come back.
That's it. And what is that about? Because it's not Vietnam anymore. I mean, I hear what you say about Vietnam, but we are it feels like we are in a different era, at least in relation to the veterans
and that's also two different things. And one is that folks coming back now, because they may not have felt that they were fully able to serve because of maybe a contractor or some experience that they just didn't do what they thought when they were going in, or especially compounded if they have a major injury, a disability, then they might feel a certain level of I'm a failure, even though obviously it's not. So folks coming back now, they don't want to sit in a VFW and share stories with people.
Right.
They have a lot of people coming back who say thank you for your service. But those folks are shopping in malls and going on with life. They don't know what they're thanking for.
Right. Yep.
They just see a uniform.
Yep.
And these folks, they still have a want to serve. So that's when they start to join community groups and get active in things. That's what the folks who are coming back now, the greatest disservice to them is to not give them opportunities to serve, to not participate in doing something that they're skilled in. The other challenge is all the way back as far as military technique and approach and strategy has been formed, is that when you have a group of folks, you have to be very alert of your surroundings and what you're doing, and you learn from the moment your head shaved and you start in the military that you look out for everyone around you. Right. Everyone is looking out for someone else. If you're in a group of 10, you're looking out for 9 people. Every 10 person is doing that. So, and it's sometimes life or death. And it's sometimes, most often, it's honor. It's just like, well, I'm not going to forget someone. I'm not going to leave someone behind. Now, when you come back, you have been trained to not be weak, not for just bravado, but for the safety of everyone around you. How do you then say, oh, I need some help? When everything you've learned and worked on is you help other people. So that is something that's still a barrier. The other part of that is folks coming out of the military, World War II, for example, coming back on a ship from Europe, takes a while, right? So you've got time to decompress. You've got time to think about coming home to your family, to a spouse, to a girlfriend or boyfriend. Now you can be in Baghdad or Zagreb, and then coming back right to your family within days. Yeah. And you have
this makes me think, and I'm just interrupting, I apologize, but in the Ken Burns Vietnam series, which was very powerful, I thought, he talks, one of his people is a guy who's an African-American Marine from Boston, and he describes this guy, the Marine describes being in Vietnam one day, his time is up, and they're getting bombed like the day before he's supposed to leave. So he's like, this could be it, right? I'm supposed to get on a plane tomorrow. He survives, he gets on a plane, he gets back to Boston. He's African-American, it's the 68, 69, and no cab will pick him up at Logan Airport. Finally, a state police officer stops a cab, flags it, and says, you have to take this guy home. He's in full uniform, he's heading home. It's just unbelievable, and just the switch from 24, 36 hours ago, 48, he was in Vietnam getting bombed, and now he can't get a cab at home.
And that was a dual issue for him because he was a person of color. And I was talking to an individual I was interviewing for a film that I was doing called At War with Peace. And I was looking to have conversations with veterans that were struggling when they came back to find inner peace. There's a big part that isn't discussed or looked at, which is moral injuries, which is something that is not something that you get to in therapy and such. I interviewed him. The interview it was about a 2-hour interview, and after about an hour and a half was the first moment that I learned that he was a person of color. And it was because he talked about coming back. He came back to Fall River. So, and this wasn't too long ago, this was somewhere between 2005, 2006. He was stationed last in Germany. Wonderful experience, welcomed everywhere, not really treated different where he was. I forget what city he was in and where he was based. But as soon as he got back, uniform or no, women clutching their purse, crossing the street, not able to get a job, all of that. So this is something that's also, when we're talking about what are the challenges when people come back, there are many, many, many. For myself, my own service, how much do I love the government after I see the government kind of chasing after me, paling in comparison to a person of color who's got that all their military career, but then coming back to the country that you've been defending, protecting, serving for, and that you're respected here less than in a country you've come from. So that's something that is obviously a big issue now that there's more attention to, but still a long, long way to go. And that's Massachusetts.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely fascinating. I suppose this is a whole other chapter in this discussion. Just spend a second, and I know it's years of discussion on the moral injuries, because that is that of course is a, you know, if your job is to point a gun at somebody, I'm sure that is a challenging moment. And I have a friend who was in the Marine Corps, and he said when they were in basic or officer training, they had a session where they had Marines who had come back from Iraq or Afghanistan, and they had all these guys and women who were learning to be officers, and everybody's loud and making a lot of noise, and then they had a session where they talked about having to shoot at somebody. And he said the room just went, there was a quiet in that room that you couldn't describe, and slowly people talked about their experiences of being in that situation, and presumably part of it was training these newer officers to be what that moment would be like. And it stuck with me. I suppose I'll just say that. But presumably you have thought about that and grappled with that as well.
Absolutely. So moral injuries, the best example I have is an individual who was serving in the Middle East. There had been a IED, an explosive device that had exploded under 2 vehicles. There were about 7 or 8 people who were killed, and they were assembling to go out into the field to find who the folks were and to take them out. Right before that, they're gathered together, and these are people thinking about their friends who they've just lost. And there is a chaplain, and the chaplain is blessing them. So they're saying, you know, Lord, protect these service people, you know, for protecting the freedoms of the United States, and, you know, so on and so forth. So now, and in that group, you've got some people who you don't know if they're atheists, if they're Christian, if they're Jewish, if they're Muslim, where they fall. So there's that conflict. Now you go out, and now you feel you've got this sanctity. You've got this. Well, you know, I've been given this right to take someone's life. But then you're on the other side of a sight if you're using a weapon, and you're looking and you're saying, well, that person probably has a faith. Or if you start to identify with the person, it makes it much more difficult. That kind of wound, if you think of it as a wound that's affecting you, it's hard to kind of get through that in just standard therapy. There's something that you just can't get to with medications and just standard, you know, cognitive behavioral therapy. And that's what a lot of veterans get when they go into the VA. It's not bad, it helps some people. But if somebody has that experience where, for example, a horrific experience of shooting a child through a pregnant woman that's holding an improvised device that's going to explode, and we know that she and this child have been forced forward to do so, and it makes a very challenging situation. How do you live with that? How do you reconcile that? Now you can come back and you can talk about it. It was my orders, it was a decision I had to make, it was split second, but that lives with you. Taking that life there, especially if it's one that feels of innocence. The way to break through that is the most horrific way, and where we get to where we are now is to dehumanize other people, to us and them. And that's what makes it, but it's a lot of work to do. And then when you have someone coming back, and if they're a neutral killing machine, if you will, how are they going to assimilate? How are they going to be able to work? How are they not going to have a moment where they snap and they don't have something to kind of go back on? So that moral injury is something that I think if we give people not just cognitive behavioral therapy or whatever kind of talk therapy they can get and medications, then we need to just get everything out that we possibly can. Maybe that's a conversation with their spiritual leader if they do have a faith. Maybe it is meditation. Maybe it is trying an alternative method of therapy, like a ketamine study, or maybe yoga, meditation, and maybe some of the music therapy. Maybe some of these things work. Maybe one is the one that someone really gravitates to, and they can kind of shift out of that and understand themselves more in their role in humanity. But that's something that it's nonprofits and smaller groups, and then kind of it just feels like more new agey. But that person that can be in therapy for 10 years and then suddenly they take their life, it's because you're not getting to that moral part, that spiritual part that's been damaged, because it's more than just talk. You've got to kind of transcend.
Well, let's talk. One of the things that's amazing about this conversation is you get into some of the deepest of the deep questions that we face as human beings. I want to focus on two other aspects you mentioned that are challenging, very challenging, obviously for veterans. I want to look at the veterans angle on it, which is one, you mentioned suicide, and the other is homelessness. Those are obviously two separate things, but I think veterans experience them in higher rates than the population at large. What can you tell us? Lead us into that conversation a little bit so we have a better understanding of what it's all about.
So I'd say that just to kind of go from an optimistic angle, the best way to kind of mitigate this horrific circumstance is early intervention. So we just started, my office, Veteran Services, just started getting notifications from the Department of Defense when a new person comes to live in Cambridge. And so now I can go seek them out. They might be like, oh, I just got home, I'm fine, I'm filling out my resumes, I'm gonna get a job. But I will stay in touch with them and keep talking to them, especially if I'm picking up some kind of, like PTS vibes or something. I'm getting like, oh, they're not fully ready, or they don't see challenges that I can foresee. I've seen this playbook before. If you stay with that person, the trust is the most important part. So that's kind of going back again to veterans working with veterans. If you build up a trust before they are in crisis and need something, you're thousands of miles ahead of the game of preventing that moment, because they will call you before they make that decision, before they make that very quick decision and often violent decision for veterans, because we have weapons and more often than most folks. So early intervention in that way, and that's where I was talking also, folks needing community groups to get involved, not to just to sit in a room at a bar and talk, but to do things, to feel like they're connecting with their community, because it's a feeling of isolation that makes it easier for someone who's struggling to take their own life. If they feel like they're alone in their circumstances, perhaps they feel like they've done something so horrific that they can't get past because they've not interacted with other people who've been in the same circumstances. So the biggest challenge that we have today is the folks that haven't had that, which is most people. The military is getting a little bit better, and I started to get there when went off on a side road when we were talking about folks having a couple weeks to come back, and folks coming back quickly.
Right.
Is that the military is getting a slight bit better when people are exiting the military, to help them know about a VSO in a community, to help them, a veteran service officer, to help them understand that they could be eligible for benefits, even starting a claim for them before they leave. It's irregular. It's consistent in the Army, not as consistent in other branches that I've seen from folks coming in. And for example, the United States Navy, for whatever reason, they don't communicate to the Department of Defense for them to be able to communicate to me that I have a Navy veteran coming here. There's a little gap there. So when we're working with folks today, we don't know where they are in that spectrum. So it's a barrier, and it just takes a lot of kind of sweat equity, I would call it, where I'm getting involved, or staff I have are getting involved with somebody and building that relationship to learn where they're at, to then kind of shift what our approach is. So that's one of the biggest challenges is folks, the longer they've been back, or the longer that they've been living without assistance, they develop maladaptive alternatives to escape the challenges they have. Substance abuse, whatever it is.
Yeah.
The other challenge is pride. So a lot of folks who might be unhoused will stay in a tent far away from view, will sleep at a few different friends' houses and not even tell them that they're not housed. We know what it's like on deployment. We know what it's like to live out of a tent and to put our uniform on and look great. So we could live homeless and still go to a job and no one would know. So there's that challenge that people have the ability to survive and keep going at times that anyone else would be eligible, that they are eligible to get services. So it's also hard to find the folks. And then when you find them, it's hard to say, hey, we can help you. And that's a two-pronged challenge. One, they've had all that experience, that they know how to take care of themselves, and that the part we talk about, which is, I've come up with a term for it, and I forget what it is right now.
It'll probably
but it's that kind of, we take care of everyone else but ourselves. And the other challenge is for those folks, how long they've had of this maladaptive behavior, to kind of figure out where their stuck points are, in addition to what have they experienced within the VA system, which we talked about how great it is in Massachusetts. We still can do better, and they may have had a lot of their experiences in Florida or in Colorado or somewhere else.
Right, yeah.
So then there's that barrier and challenge that, oh, I've already tried. I've already gone to the VA 12 times and they just give me pills and I leave, or they don't, or I wait, or what have you. So there's all of the resistance where they feel already burnt, where they're ready to accept help, because it really hurts to go and dig, to get through substance abuse issues and addiction, or to go through and visit PTS issues to try to get help, and then that help drops off. It's like, oh, why did I do that? Now I'm raw and I'm left alone. So there are a lot of things that kind of are really important, where it's preventative early on, finding veterans, which we talked about the demographic data, which I'm a little bit more knowledgeable about, but it's primarily by reaching out into the community and meeting people. So we can think that when someone comes back who's younger, comes back today, they might be coming back to a family that they left and stay in their childhood bedroom or in a basement apartment, but they're looking to go somewhere else because they want to be alone. They're an adult. They've lived, as an adult. So they want to get out of that environment, and if they have any challenges, which most of us do when we come back, now they've got a challenge with their family who knew, they knew Sam when he left at 18.
Yeah, right.
And now Sam at 26 or 30 is very different.
Yeah.
So there's also that, it's painfully obvious to the veteran that they're different and that they can't be who their family needs. That's extremely challenging. So if they can't find an apartment in Cambridge, they're going to leave. So that's where again, this is my assessment from just kind of what I'm seeing and what I know. If you can't afford to live here now, Vietnam vets off. A lot of folks, they grew up here as kids. Their parents passed away and they inherited their house, and now they've got a really great house in Cambridge. So we're pretty good with our property taxes, so they're okay to stay here. But again, I don't have the exact numbers. And this is my own assessment. I don't have anyone telling me this. I don't have research that's showing me this. This is just my best guesses, because I'm always trying to figure this out to answer that question.
I want to, so we only have a certain number of minutes on Unplanned, and I don't want to go too far over those minutes, but we're coming up on Veterans Day 2020. One of my perceptions, I'm not military, I was not in the military, is that unless you are a veteran and you understand that world, you're part of that world, we sort of check in on Memorial Day and Veterans Day, and we come out and there's a parade or there's somebody gives some speeches, and you kind of feel like you did your little piece. But clearly that doesn't get at it, and my experience with veterans is that they had an experience that you're not going to get. You're not going to understand it because you weren't there. You didn't see it. And what should we take? What should we process? Not just for this Veterans Day, but for every day afterwards. You know, we will always have veterans, and sadly, we will probably always have conflicts. So where should we be? It's not 1946. You know, half the population didn't go off to war, and the other half had family who went off to war. It's a different time. What should we? How should we think about this going forward?
That is. You've asked some good questions, but for me, that's one of the most important and one of the most valuable ones, because it really lends itself well to some of the issues that you're asking about. How do we get ahead, and these really challenging ones. If folks are able to honor and recognize veterans 365 days out of the year, and not just Memorial Day and Veterans Day, then a lot of the issues we have would be significantly less. Prior to this role, I'm going to admit something. I never went to any Veterans Day event or any Memorial Day event or any Patriots Day event because I just didn't want to. Because I never felt it was for me. I've always felt like it's for other people to show their appreciation, but it's very brief. And so for a lot of veterans, it's not something that is immensely meaningful to us. We appreciate that there are the holidays and the people think about us. But it gives that thank you for your service, not knowing anything about you or who you are or what, why you served or anything like that. So that's kind of one of the challenges, where there's this superficiality, where we understand, we learn from Vietnam and from other experiences to be respectful of veterans, but not really why and what that means. So one of the things that can really help with that, what the public can do, is all of those restaurants and folks that offer a discount on November 11th, you got one dinner somewhere that you can choose 30 of them around restaurants. Which one are you going to go to? Are you going to go that day? Are you tired? You're probably going to miss it. Give that discount all the time. Let your folks know, have something on the menu, 10% discount for veterans. Real easy. And then you just tell them you're veteran, show them your card, that kind of thing. You save them a little money here and there. If you are going to say thanks for your service to a veteran, if those words are ever going to come out of your mouth, be prepared to ask them what questions. At first, understand they might not want to talk about their service, and if they do, don't just thank them for the service. Ask them, where did they serve? Not where, sorry. What branch did they serve? What did they do? What was their job? What are some of the important experiences they had? Show them and really care about what they did in the military. Because if you ask somebody where you went to college, you don't often just nod and turn away. Thanks for going to college. You say, oh, where'd you go? What'd you study? What was it like? Do the same thing. And be okay to let them know that you don't know anything about the military. That's okay. Because if you try to let them think that you do, it's just not going to work. That's one of the ways that we can help people, veterans, in just day-to-day life. And then just when we're thinking of what things are important to contribute to help with, so many issues are important, right? Black Lives Matter, children, homelessness, a lot of issues that are all important to us. If you just keep veterans on there, because even as I try to figure out how many veterans are in the city of Cambridge, we know there are enough, and even if there's just one, we want to make sure that every year, more than twice a year of their lives, that we take care of them, we care about them, and that we provide the services for them, and that we have preferences for them and discounts for them in places 365 days of the year. And that's another program I want to do, a Veterans Honor Card, which is for Cambridge citizens, that Cambridge businesses that want to participate, that they can show an ID to show, and we can validate every year. We validate for other reasons that they are a veteran, and just whatever they want to offer.
Yeah,
free pastry, discount on books, whatever it is. These are things, tangible things. This is the second thing. Veterans in Cambridge, I don't know if you know this, but in 2016, I started a Veterans Appreciation Week. So we still do the observance at the cemetery, we still give our speeches and read our proclamations, but right after that, we have a lunch at the Legion, and then we have a full week of activities, which is not folks sitting and listening or talking to us, but where they're getting a massage, they're getting acupuncture, they're getting a free painter's workshop, free writer's workshop. fitness and nutrition from specialists
Yeah.
helping them. We are expressing tangible thanks to folks. That's another way. Instead of just saying and giving these discounts, to do things, to give tangible things to people. And then when you do that, ask about who they are, ask about what they did, what they care about, recognize them as an individual. And then that's the other part with,
They'll come to you.
yes.
I'm going to get, so we're going to wrap.
Yep.
So, Neil, I want to thank you very much
My
for
pleasure.
taking time. Honestly, personally, a fascinating conversation. Very complicated issues. These are people who obviously give so much. We haven't talked about any of the positive sides. These are very, very gung-ho people
Yep.
who know how to work in units, work in teams. A lot of them have experienced real leadership opportunities, and they're put under very stressful situations, and they're required to perform. And you know, when that comes back into society, we haven't really maybe we haven't found as good ways to activate those people in our civilian society, which has a much lower bar of entry. It just, you know, I'm a person, I do what I do. But anyway, completely fascinating conversation. We really want to thank you very much.
I do want to add that because I feel bad we didn't say a lot of positive things, but if you hire a vet, you know you're going to get someone who's mission before self.
Right.
They're gonna work hard. Most folks, if they've made it through the military for at least one term, you know they're hardworking. You know you're gonna have to ask them to go take a lunch break because they're working too hard. That's how most of us are. So,
Yeah.
you know, that's another way to help. Hire a veteran. Pay attention to that. If you have two equal resumes next to each other, one's a veteran, one's not, consider the veteran. It's going to help you as well.
If you're a Cambridge veteran or you're just interested in veterans affairs, where would you go to find out more about the work you're doing?
We're on the second floor of 51 Inman Street. You can also call us at 617-349-4760 or email us at veterans@cambridgema.gov. We are CAMBVETMA on social media, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. So you can reach us in all of those ways. And then when we're able to be together in person, please come to our Veterans Appreciation Week. Please tell people about it. It's for the full week. Whenever Veterans Day falls, whenever the 11th is, it's for the rest of that week. And you know, anyone that you see, if you ever have any impression that you know someone who's a veteran in the community, and also we didn't talk about Blue Star families, who are families who have a veteran who is deployed, and there I guarantee you there are plenty of those in Cambridge. Ask them what they need. Talk to your neighbors, find out where their veterans are, and let them also know about us. Help us get folks to know who we are so we can help more people.
Thank you for being on Unplanned.
Thank you for having me on Unplanned.